Hello, and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast number 2216. The topic is nutrition, and the title is Using Caloric Cycling to Optimize Macronutrient Balance. One of my clients is currently working to correct chronic undereating. They're wanting to balance being lean and having good performance in their workouts, in their runs. They do weight training, running, just really anything fun. They'll do some trail rides, trail hiking, they'll do biking, swimming. They like kind of doing a little bit of everything. And what was happening was previously they were under eating, and that led to their body looking soft, and they weren't seeing an improvement in their performance. Their performance plateaued. The body wasn't looking lean. They really weren't seeing anything. Their weight wasn't even going down. So it felt like everything was stuck. They reached out and asked for help. So I wanted to cover in today's podcast what we are doing to correct that issue. And one of the steps that we've just implemented is using caloric cycling to optimize our macronutrient balance. What this means is previously she has had a fear of over-consuming calories, most specifically carbs and fats, in the fear that it would lead to excessive body fat formation. What happened, though, was due to that fear, she started restricting, and then she eventually restricted too much. In order to get her more comfortable with eating more, we went ahead and pushed our calories up a little bit, a very controlled amount. They're not even where they actually eventually will need to be, but they're up from where she was. And part of her acceptance of eating more has come through eating more protein. Protein goes towards muscle building, muscle repair. It does a lot of other benefits in our body. And protein in even, certain reasonable specific amounts of surplus. The reason why I chose all those words was you can have an excessive surplus, but the surplus that she believes she is in now is within her acceptance. Protein within a reasonable surplus, actually, even if it's in an unreasonable surplus, really protein doesn't get converted over to body fat. If anything, eating protein in excess will bring along with it maybe an excess of carbs and fats, and that's what gets converted over to body fat. But protein itself doesn't really get metabolically changed, like the chemical structure of protein doesn't get changed over to body fat. So we don't have to worry about eating more protein in the fear that it would convert to more fats. If somebody has experienced that, it's usually because with more protein came the associated carb and or fats that came with that protein source, and then that led to an abundance of carbs and fats, then that led to the abundance of body fat. So really protein itself, if it's eaten in isolation, even in a surplus, doesn't lead to body fat formation. So I think I safely talked through that. So she has been willing to increase her calories via protein. The downside is, though, the protein is becoming too much. So she's, in a sense, getting a false sense of having an increased caloric intake. We know that she was experiencing muscle wasting and stagnation in her progress, results, aesthetics, all that, because of insufficient carb and fat intake. So if she increases her calories only via protein, not carbs and fats, she'll have the false assurance, the false kind of security in thinking, I'm doing a good job, my calories are going up, but not really, because they're not going up in carbs and fats, they're going up in protein. So what we started to see in the weekly journals, all my online clients have an online journal. It's a Google Doc that's private to them. So they write in any questions, I write in any answers, and then I also do video reviews and nutrition reviews. She is tracking her nutrition information on Chronometer. So I'll go in there, I'll log into her profile and say, hey, on these days you're eating this many calories, this much protein, these are our targets. Did we do, good, not as good? What could we do a little bit better? How could we be more optimal? It's just going through and checking those out. So The current range that I have her eating is anywhere within 1,650 calories to 2,450 calories. Actually, anywhere in there would be safe for her. She is on the lower end by choice because we're working on kind of accepting the more calories is okay process. And then our protein, we're aiming for between 120 to 160 grams a day. What's happening is she is aiming towards the very high end of the protein range, but the very low end of the calorie range. And that's causing our protein percentage to be too high. So I went through the last couple journal entries, and I showed her that on, like, for example, on one day she had 1,749 calories and 146 grams of protein. That would be 33% protein. She had another day that was 38% protein, another one 37, 39, 38, 36. So the protein percentage is chronically kind of staying around the high 30%. The downside is typically our protein percentage would be best between 25 to 33%. That's actually a very large range, but it depends on the activity level of the person. If they're not very active, but they lift weights and they cause a lot of muscle damage, they might be better towards the higher end of that range, say around 33%, so they have sufficient protein for muscle repair and muscle growth, but they don't have an over excessive amounts of carbs and fats. So you can think about the higher the protein percentage, that means the lower the carb and fat percentage would be. So for her, she was eating on the high end, actually above the high end of protein percentage, which meant that her carb and fat intake was beyond the low end of what we'd want. So I let her know that the ideal protein percentage is between 25 to 33%. I listed the different reasons and factors that might come into play, such as the styles of training, the activity volume per week. There's also the muscle mass the person carries, the types of exercise they do. There's a lot. But I went through and actually gave specific to her parameters, what might be the best percentage for her. Now, what we're finding is that where she's at now versus what might be best, there's a good range between there, and there's no need for us to go from one all the way to the other. We don't want to make an extreme change because that's going to set off a lot of alarms, internal alarms for her. To have the fear of eating more might cause her to gain more body fat. And then also, the body is going to need time to metabolically change and transfer and make the adjustment. Let's say, for example, somebody's been eating 1,000 calories and they should be eating 2,000 calories. Their body, their metabolism has adjusted to the 1,000. If you just jump them up to 2,000, they're going to gain body fat. So you have to slowly kind of walk their way up there. And that allows the body's metabolism to adjust, as well as the person just making small micro adjustments to their daily food choices, their portions. It makes it a much easier process. So for her, I pointed out that the higher protein percentage is giving her a false positive of a higher caloric intake, which would be associated with her making improvements. But if it's only coming via protein, we're not going to get the improvements we want. We want that higher caloric intake to be coming from carbs and fats to better fuel our energy for performance, but then also to lessen the energy deficit that the body is in. So therefore, it is more willing to let go of and burn off stored body fat and not actually fight to actually replace and store more body fat. She was very receptive, did a great job, great response. She was basically just right away going, okay, how do I do that? So I responded and said, thank you for being willing to play with the numbers a little bit. And I said, what would be the next step for us? Would be to start to do caloric cycling. Part of the reason that brought that question up was she has days that she weight trains only, days where she'll do running and weight training. Then she has days where the running is quite excessive versus minimal. And then she'll also have days where she doesn't do either. So our activity level can be very high and very low. I asked her what her step counts have been because she wears an Apple Watch and has all that smart technology stuff. And what we found was her daily average steps are a little over 10,000 steps a day. However, On the days she doesn't train, on the days where maybe she's overwhelmed with work and has a lot going on work-wise and life schedule-wise, she might have a day where she only has 2,000 steps. So the variance is large. On certain training days, on non-training days, we have a large variance of energy usage. So therefore, it makes sense for us to have a variance to our energy consumption. On days we move more, let's eat more. On days we move less, let's eat less. But let's do that in a strategic way so we can optimize what we're eating based on what results we want. If we want her to be lean, we have to make sure on the days we're super active, we don't have a super deficit that the body then fights to try to replace. On the day she's inactive, we want to make sure we're not overeating, and then therefore we're giving the body that excess to create the body fat to fight off against, basically fight against the process we're really looking for, which is to optimize leanness and performance. So when we move more, we want to eat more. When we move less, we want to eat less. When we have a high variance of movement on a day-to-day basis, we need to have a high variance of our energy intake. So I set up some examples for her that's basically going to be a guesstimation of where we can start. Now, this is similar, as I mentioned, to her in her journal, of what I do with people who have multi-categorical training modalities. Fancy wording, just to kind of figure out how to say it in, concisely, but then I ramble on and say it's trying not to be wordy. But the idea is I'll have clients who train for Ironman. So we do strength training, weight training. They'll also have running, biking, and cycling. I have people who do military prep. They might have running, rucking, weight training. We might also need to be doing explosive sprints, body weight style work, and then they might also have a day where they're trying to, back squat twice their body weight. So there's going to be a high variance in activity that relates to a high variance in energy demand and even recovery demand. So we want to have our intake match our output. If our output has high variance, our intake would need to have high variance. So the example I set up for her has a high, medium, and a low day. The high day, I estimated for her to be around 1,900 to 2,050 calories with 130 to 150 grams of protein. This would put her protein percentage around 28%. That's actually kind of in the middle of our protein range, but for her, that's 10% below what she's been doing. So that's quite a stretch of a change. So this is the day that represents the most change that I would ask of her. And the high day is going to be when she does weight training and or she pairs that with any other type of additional modality. So it's basically not an or. So weight training by itself and weight training with anything else. So if the day involves weight training in any way, whether it's weight training alone or weight training with other things, we're going to call it a high day. Then we have a medium day, which for her is 1,750 to 1,900 calories, 130 to 150 grams of protein. That's going to be 30% protein. That would be any active day that might be running, biking, swimming, that doesn't involve weight training. So that would be a medium day. Then our low day would be no weight training, no activities. That's going to be 1,600 to 1,750 calories and 130 to 150 grams of protein. That's 33% protein. So the range I'm taking her through is 28 to 33% of protein intake. What that's going to do is that allows for our high activity days to have higher amounts of carbs and fats, our lower activity days to have lower amounts of carbs and fats. That better matches our carb and fat energy demands on those days. That allows us to maximize performance, but also maximize leanness. So using caloric cycling is a great way to optimize macronutrient balance for whatever your goal might be. I might balance this in different ways if I'm working with somebody for aesthetics. Maybe they want to get on stage, they're doing bikini, wellness, figure, women's physique, men's classic physique, men's bodybuilding, any of those categories. Might be somebody in military prep, might be like an endurance athlete, say a soccer athlete. It might look differently for them. Person training for an Ironman, person who just does marathons. There's various clients I work with that have performance elements, aesthetic elements, maybe both, whatever it might be, even health optimization. We're looking at people with, like reducing body fat as a main goal, maybe managing a nutrition disorder as a main goal. There's a wide variety of clients I work with, and so how this caloric cycling concept applies is different per person, but the concept of using caloric cycling to best optimize macronutrient balance is standard and true for everyone. Again, the more variance you have to what you do per day indicates that you would need more variance to how much you consume per day. So for her, this setup is going to allow her to increase her carbs and fats on her training days, decrease her carbs and fats on her non-training days, and then that better matches our carbs and fats to her, basically our carbon fat intake to her carbon fat output. The reason why weight training is often given the highest carb and fat allowance is to improve performance, increase hydration, but then also to improve recovery. We're going to have systemic recovery that is needed, energetic recovery, carbs and fats, muscular recovery, which would be protein demand, and even like CNS recovery. Then other forms of training, such as running, biking, swimming, etc., they'll have lower carb and fat values due to the decreased recovery demand. Those activities can often burn more calories while you're doing them. However, they tend to be a more slow release energy demand, meaning they're more fat fueled than carb fueled, and they'll have a lower recovery demand. So therefore, they're more of like a medium type day allocation. And then obviously rest days are going to be the lowest because they're rest days. So the numbers, as I wrote for this client, I said they're going to be numbers that stretch your comfortable level. And as we play with them, as we see how your body responds, we might make some adjustments. Typical adjustments are going to be to eat even more carbs and fats on activity days, even less carbs and fats on non-activity days, try to get the extremeness of those intakes a little bit greater than what I have given to her now. But we want to see how her body responds. I want to see how she feels emotionally and mentally through this process before I would make larger, more extreme changes. But I thought it would be fun to share in today's podcast that this is a concept that I use with clients all the time. And it's a concept that if you do not use currently, could be something to look into. Again, this would be perfect for people if they have high variance to their activities from day to day. It would then make sense that we want to have a higher variance to our carb and fat intake per day. Awesome. If you're interested in nutrition help to try to figure out how to set this stuff up for you, you can always reach out at our email at brutalirongym@gmail.com. We also have our services available on our website, www.brutalirongym.com. I'm always here, always happy to help. If you need anything, just reach out and I'll reach back out. So I'll reach back out to you and we'll figure out what you need. Awesome. If you like the podcast, please share the podcast. The more people we share it with, the more people can help. If you want to donate to support the podcast, you can do a donation on our website. We also have a connection with NutriCost, which is a supplement company. If you use the code BrutalIron10 on their website, you'll get a 10% discount. And then of what you spend, 10% of that gets sent back to us as a commission. So it's a great way to give back to the podcast, but also you get great discounts on great supplements. Then if you want more information from us, you can always find us on social media channels. You can find us and follow us on Instagram and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.